I have very mixed feelings about the 2019 movie The King. It does some things impressively well, and many other things disappointingly poorly. So on today, this Feast of St. Crispian, October 25th, the 610th anniversary of the Battle of Agincourt. Grab yourself a tankard of ale or a sack of wine and sit by the campfire while I walk you through everything right and wrong with The King, occasionally drawing comparisons to history and various presentations of Shakespeare's plays. On a visual level, the movie gives us a handful of gorgeous shots like this, and this, which almost feel like paintings, but also gives us many shots like this, and this, when we can barely see what's happening. I know this is before electricity, but come on. It's like they were trying to make a bad pun on the Dark Ages. And King Timothy Chalamet, I mean Duke Paul Atreides, I mean Henry V, has this face for 90% of his scenes. He's so angsty, I feel like he would fit into Black Veil Brides, Green Day, Falling in Reverse, or My Chemical Romance. Maybe that's how they were hoping to appeal to the young female audience. Anyway, in this early meal conversation, we get a whole discourse on the strenuous relations between England, Scotland, and Wales. Very well done. And I like that the main character in these first few scenes is Prince Percy Hotspur, reminding us that the story is much bigger than just Henry V himself. And I absolutely love that King Henry IV led the table blessing in Latin. Nice touch. And to remind us that this movie was made recently, we get an F-bomb less than 7 minutes in. Now, to make sure this complaint of mine is well grounded, I went down a little rabbit hole into the history of the F word. No, it is not an acronym for fornication under command or consent of the king. It appears to have Germanic origin, meaning to strike, and okay, long story short, we have one record of the word appearing in the 1300s, one in the 1400s, and one in the 1500s. So whenever you see a medieval movie or book using this word, the author is doing it for shock value, and no, it's not authentic. Moving on. We get a scene of Prince Hal playing and drinking and making merry with John Falstaff and his other lower class friends in the tavern, as Shakespeare tells us in his stories. They even name the tavern keeper as Nell Quickly, which is a nice nod to Shakespeare. Prince Hal ignores a summons by his father, King Henry IV, who is ill and dying of some unknown skin disease. We see Timothy Chalamet wake up the next day with a young woman in his bed, but at least there is no sex scene and she is clothed. A welcome rare restraint from Netflix. We get a scene of King Henry IV's court in which the church is objecting to new taxes, which is how Shakespeare's Henry V opens. Hey, I remember that advisor guy. He played King Arthur in that terrible Green Knight movie. I'm working on a review for that movie next. Prince Henry walks in, and everyone is tense because grimdark is in vogue. King Henry IV informs his son, awkwardly in front of the entire court, that he will not inherit the throne, but his younger brother, Thomas, will. Prince Hal says he doesn't want the throne anyway, so there. Now, this is some history that I did not know, so I did some research and yeah, no, this didn't happen. Thomas actually assisted his older brother Henry in his campaign in France. Now, I understand taking creative liberties when writing a historical story, but these liberties should fill in the gaps, not just change facts. Moving on, Prince Thomas leads his father's royal army to battle against Prince Percy Hotspur's rebel army. I'm no expert, but I am pretty pleased by the armor and setting in general. Except, why does Percy get a coat of arms on his armor, but Hal's breastplate is blank? Seriously, throughout the entire movie. They should look like this, or this, but we get this. I cry. Anyway, Prince Harry, however, shows up, tells his younger brother Thomas to let him handle this, and challenges Hotspur to a duel to avoid a battle. As Henry says, they are all Englishmen, so it is a shame to spill each other's blood. He even points out to Hotspur that they shouldn't even duel, because King Henry IV will be dead from his illness soon, and after that they can ransom Mortimer from the Welsh and all be friends again. It really does feel tragic when Henry does kill Percy. From that first scene, we came to respect and sympathize with him. Now, the duel is pretty good and has already been given attention by other YouTubers more qualified than I, so I would just say three things. First, it feels odd that not a single other person from the rebel side rode forward with Percy to observe the duel. He's completely alone in front of the entire royal army. They could have literally just captured him and ended the rebellion. It would not have been any harder to just have Percy's father and a couple other knights ride forward to observe the duel. This, in fact, does happen, but once the duel has already begun. I guess Percy didn't tell his father that he was going to accept Henry's challenge. Second, why is there a cut down circle of grass conveniently placed for a ring? And third, the duel didn't happen. The Battle of Shrewsbury in 1403 resulted in the defeat of the rebels, much loss of English life, and with Henry taking an arrow to his face, leaving him with a gnarly scar on his cheek the rest of his life. Yep. Now, the movie does give Henry this scar. See, here and here and here. But it's funny that they skip over the scene in which he actually received it. How awesome would it have been to have him take an arrow to the face and have a medical surgery where he gets it removed? Some in the audience might say that that's unrealistic, yet it actually did happen. But no, the movie makers make up drama that didn't happen and remove drama that actually did. Anyway, rather than being grateful for Henry taking care of the rebel Percy for him, young Prince Thomas is pissed at his older brother for stealing his thunder, and lets us know with F-bomb number 2. Jumping forward a little bit, Prince Thomas dies off-screen in another minor war, then Henry IV dies, leaving Prince Hal to be crowned as king. And in the feast scene that follows, we get a little bit of world building that I just love. A herald presents a large golden cup as a gift from King Wenceslaus IV of Bohemia, and we also see that Henry's sister Philippa is married to King Eric of Denmark. This simple addition makes the world feel so much more lived in, so much more connected, and it reminds us of the all important aspect of medieval politics royal marriages. I really like the attention the movie gives to Henry and Philippa, even if it is just one scene conversation. It makes him feel more like a three-dimensional person, and the Doge of the Republic of Venice sent as his gift a mechanical wind-up bird from Constantinople, reminding us of some of the advanced technology from the Middle Ages. Henry gives both these gifts to guests of his at the table, which would seem quite bad manners today, yet in the setting feels very normal and noble. And then, last of all, the Dauphin of France sends, that's right, a tennis ball. I love the way this movie takes that event we all know from Shakespeare, y'all have read your Shakespeare, right? And incorporates it smoothly in. Now, I could find no historical evidence that the French court actually sent these tennis balls to Henry, except for this one ballad which Shakespeare used as his source. But since it's an iconic part of the Shakespeare narrative, I still appreciate it. Now, Timothy Chalamet's Henry V is a more patient and indeed peaceful fellow than Shakespeare's version of him. When he receives the tennis ball from France, his advisor tries to convince him to see it as an insult and respond in kind. But Henry is like, nah, it's fine. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. And then when the Archbishop says, the throne of France is totally yours by right, Henry says, no thank you. I want to end the feuding wars in Britain. I don't want to start new wars in France. Despite his reluctance, war is on the horizon. I absolutely love that Prince Timothy Chalamet's Henry speaks French with the French spy defector. It's small, but I always appreciate when movies bother to use different languages when appropriate. And of course, completely accurate that Henry would be fluent in French, as the Plantagenet royal family were Norman, that is, French, or rather, Viking French. Henry V was actually the first Plantagenet king to use English regularly at all. Also, it's kind of funny that Timothy Chalamet is himself French, or rather, Jewish French. But that's neither here nor there in this case. This defector spy is, supposedly, an assassin sent by King Charles of France to kill Henry. Henry is still desirous of peace, but at the pressing of his council, agrees to at least write a letter back to King Charles, demanding an explanation, and telling him to just send an army, not an assassin if he wants war. King Charles, of course, denies that he sent the spy, and in the end of the movie, Henry comes to believe him and realizes that he was manipulated by his own advisors the whole time. This entire fake assassin subplot is not in history or in Shakespeare, but is an invention of the movies, which I will address later. The final straw from France is the Southampton plot, an attempt to bribe some of Henry's friends over to their side to overthrow Henry and replace him with his own cousin Mortimer, who was mentioned earlier. When Henry learns of this, he at last agrees to go to war with France. One of these traitors is Cambridge, to whom Henry had given the mechanical bird back at the coronation feast. That little scene had been a setup to this payoff, giving the betrayal more weight and making us emotionally care more. In Shakespeare's play, this is all done rather hurriedly and doesn't quite register emotionally. So in this case, I would say the 2019 movie actually improves upon the story. I will say, I would rather they have not actually shown Cambridge getting his head cut off. I think this is a bit of modern shock value, like the F-bombs. Things that are obscene, I would argue, are best left off-scene, which is where the word obscene comes from. There's your etymology lesson for the day. Now, moving forward in preparations for his campaign in France, Henry reconnects with his dear old friend John Falstaff in a tavern and invites him to join his campaign as his marshal. Yep. Then we get a scene of King Hal telling all his lords that this low-born nobody is to be their marshal because he, quote, respects war and is a good man. Now, as I have said before, some creative liberties are of course acceptable, but this takes it too far. John Falstaff is a fictional character from the mind of Shakespeare. It works for him to be a friend of Hal's, but to make him a marshal in an actual historical battle? I can only say that I am as disappointed as Hal's lords must have been. Men that deserved to have been mentioned were Henry's cousin Edward, the Duke of York. It was York who died in the battle, not John Falstaff. Sir Thomas Camoy and Sir John Erpingham, who were actually present. Actually. Moving on to the Siege of Harfleur, we get these beautiful trebuchets, except, oh wait, in the real Siege of Harfleur, Henry didn't use trebuchets. He used cannons. 12 of them. As nice as the trebuchets are, it's a shame that the makers of the movie chose them over what really happened. I do appreciate that in this case, the movie is more accurate than Shakespeare was in his retelling. The Shakespeare scene of the assault on the walls gives us the fantastic "once more into the breach, dear friends, once more" speech, but it didn't happen. In the 2019 movie, we see, as in real history, the French defenders surrendered after a month of siege without an assault taking place. The only casualties the English took in the siege were from malaria and dysentery, which never get enough credit in popular depictions of war for understandable reasons. They say a great many of our men are already ill and weak from hunger, but it wasn't just hunger making them ill and weak. Funnily enough, actually, more English soldiers died from disease during this siege than they did by combat in the Battle of Agincourt. Wait, that's not funny. Stop laughing. After King Henry's capture of Harfleur, the movie makers take a massive liberty and have the Dauphin, Louis, Duke of Guienne, visit Henry's army camp and trash talk him in person. Shakespeare gives us such a cool character in the Ambassador Montjoy. Now, you don't have to do that, but it just doesn't make sense to have the Dauphin send himself in person. And then, right before the battle, King Timothy Chalamet visits the Dauphin himself. Also, the Dauphin was only 18 years old during the Battle of Agincourt, was not even present for it, and died a few months afterward. The real leader of the French army at Agincourt was the constable, Sir Charles d'Albret. I know it makes sense in a storytelling way to make the Dauphin an antagonist because it was his taunting gift of tennis balls that goaded Henry into launching the invasion, but it didn't happen. We made it up. Pure fiction. Getting close to the battle itself, the movie gets the strategic situation wrong. In Shakespeare and in history, Henry is already on his way back to the fortress harbor of Calais, ready to return home after having made good progress in France, when the French army blocks his way. This is the reason why he must fight. In the movie, Henry is still pushing deeper inland and has the option to turn back, but chooses to push on ahead. Oh my gosh, it gets worse. In the War Council, Marshal John Falstaff suggests, quote, "You can win this battle by fighting without horses and without armor." In history, it's not that the English chose not to use their cavalry, they just didn't have hardly any. Henry's army consisted of about 7,000 archers and 1,000 men at arms on foot, and they certainly did not choose to not wear their armor. If you want to experience an accurate telling of the Battle of Agincourt, just download Medieval 2 Total War and play it out there. Here's the English army, all one massive mob, as usual. Gosh, it's like Ridley Scott's Napoleon all over again. If someone were to think for one moment, he would understand that armies should and would be organized in companies, each commanded by a captain, perhaps the lord of that town, barony, or county, and each with a banner for visual clarity. Even the orc army assaulting Minas Tirith in Peter Jackson's Return of the King was visibly organized into companies. See, in the French army here, you can see their banners, but barely make out the symbols on them. One of the most famous parts of the Shakespeare play is Henry's St. Crispian Day speech to his army right before the battle. Now, the speech is an invention of Shakespeare's, but I would go so far as to say that it is one of the most inspiring speeches in all the tradition of the English language. The 1989 Kenneth Branagh is the best presentation out there. If you haven't seen it yet, do yourself a favor and watch it. I get chills every time. Now, since it is fictional, I don't mind the 2019 movie writing a completely new speech. It's just that by comparison, it's so lackluster. Timothy Chalamet gave it his all, but he didn't have much to work with. The speech basically goes, I'm going to die today and you're going to die tomorrow, or you're going to die today and I tomorrow, it matters not. But this space is England. Fight for this space. Make it tissue. Make it mass. Make it impenetrable. Yeah, don't think about it too much. I'm also reminded of the speech that Russell Crowe's Captain Jack Aubrey gives to his crew before the finale battle in Master and Commander, and just how truly stirring and inspiring it is by comparison. You felt your heart glow. Back to the movie. In the real Battle of Agincourt, the English did not send their heavy infantry ahead to lure the French down into the field. They waited behind the stakes along with the longbowmen. Wait, I just realized. Where are the stakes? The movie shows exactly one shot of sharpened stakes lying down in a pile, but then not again, as if the movie makers as well as the English soldiers considered them, but then thought, nah, don't need those. And they were the pivotal, nay, the single most iconic part of the battle. Also, King Henry was in the dead center of his battle line, not hiding on the flank in the forest for a countercharge. As for the melee itself, the fighting is nice and brutal and muddy and claustrophobic, but can you tell who is on which side? That's right. And if you can't, then how could they? Look, even the French Dauphin isn't wearing any distinguishing coat of arms. In history, this is precisely what heraldry and coats of arms were for, to distinguish friend from foe. It would have been nice to have some more color, like here, which wasn't just to be pretty, but to serve this most practical purpose. The real Henry V wore not just his coat of arms on his breastplate, but also a crown atop his helmet, like so. Not just chainmail for crying out loud. The way the movie ends the battle is with the Dauphin challenging Henry to a duel, mano a mano. Only because of the mud and his armor, and I suppose lack of basic dexterity, Louis keeps slipping and falling. Finally, Henry nods to his yeoman soldiers, who rush the Dauphin and presumably kill him? This is left rather vague. The Dauphin is barely mentioned again in the movie, either dead or alive, so just on a narrative level, his death carries hardly any weight. In real history, not only was the Dauphin not present at the battle, but Henry would much more likely have taken him prisoner. Now, of course, there are cases of royalty dying in battle, but that was typically on accident. On the one hand, in chivalry, it was considered bad form and dishonorable to kill nobility, if you could prevent it. And then there is the practical consideration of holding them for political leverage and a hefty ransom. For instance, a little earlier in the Hundred Years' War, King John II of France was captured by the English in the 1356 Battle of Poitiers. King Francis I of France was captured and held captive by Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor Henry Big Chin V, following the 1525 Battle of Pavia, which you can also play in Medieval 2 Total War. And immediately following the Third Crusade, Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI and Philip of France together captured King Richard the Lionheart of England and held him ransom for over a year until Prince John could raise the ransom to free him. So, yes, all along, Robin Hood was fighting the very taxes that would have been used to bring the true king home. Ironic. Anyway, heck, even the Hundred Years' War fantasy anime Maria the Virgin gets this right, with this soldier capturing this knight for ransom, when he could easily have killed him instead. No, I haven't seen and don't endorse the anime. I've just watched this one battle scene on YouTube for the medieval combat. Give me a break. Moving on, after the Battle of Agincourt, King Henry meets with King Charles of France to discuss the surrender and make the Treaty of Troyes. Now, King Charles really was insane, so I'm fine with how the movie presents him as odd. But I don't know why they're speaking in English when we've gotten other scenes in French, which would have been culturally more likely. Also, I'm no expert in medieval women's fashion, but it seems a shame for Catherine, Princess of the Kingdom of France, to be wearing something so simple as this. Here is Catherine in previous versions of Shakespeare's play, and just some fashion from the period. I'm just saying, it looks to me like the movie makers were intentionally trying to make the Middle Ages look drab and dreary. Shakespeare makes the meeting scene between Henry and Catherine awkward, but funny and sweet, while their meeting in this movie is awkward and tense. It's like Ridley Scott's Napoleon and Josephine all over again. Looking back, I don't think there have been any genuine smiles in this movie, just the creepy ones of the French prince and king. Then the movie has Catherine say, quote, all monarchy is illegitimate, and all I see before me is a young and vain and foolish man. What kind of postmodern, neoliberal, democratic, republican, enlightenment secular drivel is this? Sorry, I got carried away. But I see now, beyond all the good things of this movie, yet another case of movies tearing down the great men of Western civilization, like Napoleon Bonaparte, Sir Gawain, or Luke Skywalker. Now, I myself have sometimes thought it funny that really all Henry V had time to do in his reign was to win the Battle of Agincourt and then die of disease, and so perhaps does not actually deserve the legendary reputation which he has. I have thought the same of Richard the Lionheart, who spent almost all his reign on crusade or fighting against the French and hardly set foot in England. And yes, it is true that Henry's father, Henry IV, did seize the throne in a rebellion from King Richard III. Shakespeare wrote all about that in his other plays. But still, having Princess Catherine say this is clear to me to be yet another example of the modern media taking shots at great men of old, with the aim of pointing out that they weren't really so great after all. I am reminded of the words of an obscure Austrian art critic who wrote, for it was typical of this epoch that not only were its products bad, but that the authors of such products and their backers reviled everything that had been really great in the past. This is a phenomenon that is very characteristic of such epochs. The more vile and miserable are the men and products of an age, the more they will hate and denigrate ideal achievements of former generations. What these people would like best would be completely to destroy every vestige of the past, in order to do away with that sole standard of comparison which prevents their own daubs from being looked upon as art. Therefore, the more lamentable and wretched are the products of each new era, the more it will try to obliterate all the memorials of the past. Only those who have nothing of value to give to the world will oppose everything that already exists and would have it destroyed at all costs. But let's take a step back to see what is happening here. In the first draft of this script, I had the naive thought that good art or history is unbiased and true, while bad art or history is biased and false. But is this really the case? Upon reflection, I think not. In a way, historical revisionism is inevitable because all art or history is biased. That is to say, it is shaped by the worldview of the artist or historian. In a way, studying a piece of art or telling it of history tells you as much about the artist or historian as it tells you about the subject matter itself. To break it down, think of it like this. Suppose a given historical event, like the Battle of Agincourt, has 100 facts, if reality could be organized in such convenient units. Now, it is practically impossible to present all of these facts in a retelling of what happened, so the historian must pick and choose which facts to tell and which to ignore. This, at the very least, will depend upon the bias of the historian or artist, that is, what he thinks is important, or to put an even finer point on it, to reflect what he wants his audience to think about the event. A French retelling of Agincourt would be vastly different from an English retelling, with which we are most familiar thanks to the influence of Shakespeare. Heck, I would go so far as to say that any figure in history could be considered a hero or villain depending on the storyteller. The 1944 Henry V, with Laurence Olivier, was very clean and pretty. This is a reflection on how the producers saw both war and the Middle Ages, with patriotism and admiration, right as the end of World War II was on the horizon with a victory for the Allies. The 1989 Henry V with Kenneth Branagh is a bit dimmer and darker, but still glorious and romantic. The 2019 King with Timothée Chalamet is a reflection of the view of the Middle Ages as being dark, of monarchy as being a sham, and of wars being justified by political lies and manipulation of popular opinion. Okay, maybe I can sympathize with that last one because of my own biases. My takeaway for you: next time you consume a historical book or movie, think not only about what the author is telling you, but think also why he is telling you that. What facts he might be playing up or playing down, and what might be his own biases that shape the story that he presents. Getting back to the movie, after meeting with Princess Catherine, and now wondering if the assassin was sent by the French at all, or if it was just fake, and thus doubting the justice of his cause for war, Henry pays a visit to his Chief Justice Sir William Gascony, Gascon, to question him about this assassin. After an awkward and tense questioning, King Paul Atreides loses his temper and shouts F-bomb number 3, and in his temper, he murders Sir William in anger for deceiving him and fabricating the whole campaign. William Gascon was a real historical person, and he was not murdered in a fit of rage by King Henry V. That pretty much brings us to the end of the movie. My final thoughts? I'm glad I finally watched it, but also glad I didn't pay to see it in theaters. In the end, it left a overall sour taste in my mouth. My biggest takeaway is that it did some things well, but it could easily have been so much better. If you ask me, I'd say you'd better spend your time reading or watching a retelling of Shakespeare's Henry V. It's been around much longer, and will be remembered much longer yet, and you'll actually learn more history. Well, okay, some of them have their own problems too. Thank you for watching through to the end of my video. Like and subscribe if you want to see more, comment your thoughts about the movie, about the Shakespeare play, or what movie you would like to see me review in the future. Until next time, Godspeed.